Good evening. At the outset, let me thank Dr. Vidya, head of the Department of English, Sitalashmi Ramasamy College, Ms. Ragini, and also Dr. Aishwarya, the coordinators of the program, and all those dear colleagues in the Department of English, SRC, for making it possible for me to address your students and students from elsewhere on a topic that is very dear to my heart. Thank you so much for the invitation. And such programs are really the need of the hour, to repeat a cliche, in the sense students need constant encouragement. They have to be encouraged to read, to dive into the subject, to read more, so that they are well equipped not only to face a national examination of this type, but also become a well-informed person. So what is tested in this exam is nothing but your foundational knowledge. So when I say foundational knowledge, the basic things are related to history of English literature, language, and also another important branch of literature, namely literary criticism and literary theory. So in the past, people talked about four major genres, meaning prose, fiction, poetry, and drama. Now they have added one more, namely literary criticism and literary theory. So why should you know anything related to literary theory or criticism? Can't we appreciate a work of art as an aesthetic? Aesthetic response is different from what we call intellectual response or a cerebral response. The moment you talk of aesthetic response, you simply respond to the beauty of a text. So people in the past, not now, even more than 1,500 years ago, people like Plato and before him Socrates, but Plato made it everything sound very simple. And later Aristotle, Longinus, and Horace, many others, they thought of a method to analyze literature for which they gave certain prescription. So such a criticism is called prescriptive criticism. It prescribes a certain modes of writing. It prescribes a certain outcomes from this writing. And apart from entertaining, apart from making the listener or the reader appreciate the text, there is one more function, that is to help the person retain one's own bodily composure. Now, what does that mean? It's not simply mental composure, even bodily composure. So, what they meant by that was when you watch a play, for instance, it should be able to produce in you what they call an emotional catharsis. It should allow you to shed all your emotions that have been building up, maybe negative emotions that have been building up, almost reaching a pressure cooker kind of state where it requires a kind of release. So now that kind of release can be offered by watching a performance of a tragedy. Remember, in good old days, literature was meant for performance. Whether it was a tragedy or a comedy or even something like an ode. Ode is a type of song, you know. They are all meant to be performed before an audience. So the audience watching them, or in modern times, the audience reading them, they should be able to release all their mental emotions and feelings with text. Now, that is the ultimate success of a work or a work of art. So, they gave us a series of prescriptions, and in due course, they were all legalized in the sense if any text that veers away from such a prescription, or if a text refuses to follow such a prescription, then it is not fit to be called a text. So, when Horace says, "No, I'll just point out a few people within 1.5 hours, I don't have much time to go into details. For example, Horace says, yet a text should be written in such a manner, especially poetry, that a reader should repeatedly visit the text, go back and read the text again and again. And the text should be able to evoke such a feeling in the reader, elicit such a response from the reader. Only such a text can be called a standard one. So now, in order to do that, you have to produce, according to Horace at least, you need to produce the feelings. If you want to produce tragic feelings in a text, the writer ought to have the same tragic feeling, which can be effectively translated into the text. If the writer is full of merriment, then that spirit of merriment can and should be transferred into the text. So now, these are some of the prescriptions. Of course, we use some terms like purple passage and things like that. On the other hand, Longinus uses a term like sublime. Now, a text should be a literary text, not very ordinary. And it should have certain standards or standards of writing that should elevate an ordinary text to an extraordinary level. So now, in an elevated diction, choice of words, and the handling of subjects should also be such. It should not deal with very ordinary subjects. The quotidian, the ordinary, it should avoid at all costs. Meaning, it should handle only subjects that are worthy of what he calls the highest in the development of human sensibility or human feeling, human emotion. So he makes a clear distinction between the sublime and the ridiculous, the sublime and the art. So what are these writers try to do? The early um, critical theorists, they are trying to tell us what should be done at the level of composition, which means poetics. Poetics is nothing but the art of composition. So, even at the level of composing a text, even at the level of writing a text, the text should be embracing or including all those things that are noble, that are sublime, that are um, that are of very high standard. So they talk about that composition, poetics, right? You are going to come back. I don't have time to deal with Aristotle. Aristotle gives in his poetics a long list. For example, he talks about the plot, the character, thought, diction, music, and spectacle. He says these are the 6 essential constituents of a good tragedy. So it should have a very good beginning. And even when you tell the story in flashback, right, and it should talk about a serious tragic flaw in the character, especially in the um, protagonist. That should be a tragic flaw which leads to his downfall. Then finally, there is a denouement, the way a story has to resolve itself. Finally, it has to come to an end. So when it moves towards the end, how the good triumphs over evil. So this is the classical tradition. Evil always gets destroyed. Evil has no place. The evil has no place in this world. The good always triumphs over evil. Right. This happened even during the pre-Christianity. So there are many things to a tragedy. So uh, he talks about the importance of spectacle. Why spectacle is very important. Why character is very important. And so, right. So all these early theorists, it is not for them. It is not simply holding the mirror up to nature. It is much more where the imagination of the writer also comes into play. And when a work tells a story, and it should tell a story, or the writer should tell a story, keeping in mind the highest traditions of that art. Okay. Now, make a quick jump to the medieval age and later, right? What we call the early modern period, the beginning of Renaissance in England. So here we find the import of traditions from various cultures, from Greek, from Rome, from Europe. So some of the English writers were original, fair enough, but they brought in models of writing from different cultures. For example, a sonnet was an import from uh, Italy or from Rome. So now it was used by English writers. So initially they were a bit worried about the language lending itself, that is English language lending itself to the art of writing sonnets. So sonnets were written freely in Italian or in Rome or in Latin. Then they started imitating the Greek models of the play because the Greek plays were getting translated into English. Storytelling by Homer, they were all getting translated into English. Homer's Iliad, for instance, and Odyssey, they were all translated into English. So when they started writing, well, they developed a fan following or an audience, their reading audience. Remember, at that time, it wasn't um, a literary, the literacy level was so very low, and the literary traditions were very few. So you found that only sonnets and a few plays here and there. But they started writing what we call literary criticism. Now, when you say literary criticism, that is how to write something, how to enjoy something. And for instance, when Thomas Wilson, when he wrote his Art of Rhetoric in 1553, Thomas Wilson in 1553, when he wrote his Art of Rhetoric, he was focusing on the rhetorical traditions, the way the language is employed in a text. Because language plays a crucial role. And something like a rhetorical question, for instance, a declarative sentence, or even uh, something like inversion in a text, change in the word order. So he was talking about many such things and how they can be fruitfully employed in a text. The art of rhetoric, Thomas Wilson. Then George Tottenham, whom we can call the earliest of English critic, maybe the first. The Art of English Poesy in 1518. The Art of English Poesy in 1589 by George Tottenham, where he talks about the whole art of writing poetry in English. Remember, at that time, poetry was nothing but a subjective expression. So he was talking about this expression And with the help of rhetoric and with a model, especially sonnets and songs, the English have their own tradition. For example, the English have their own tradition in the form of ballads. He was taking into account various forms of writing, poetry. So, and the plays also made use of what we call um, blank verse. So, blank verse is not exactly blank as we know. How to use the blank verse, the importance of using blank verse. So, he was talking about art. And for the first time, criticism was directed against the writers and the writing. So, now remember, writers and the writer. Again, I'm quickly moving forward. So, Sir Philip Sidney King, he wrote his Apology for Poetry, where he stoutly defended the art of poetry, and he even claimed poetry is superior to history, poetry is superior to philosophy. History is about the past, poetry is about philosophy is about the present. Whereas poetry talks about past, the present, and even it talks about the future. It transcends time. A poet is a diviner. He even divines into future. So he talks about the superiority of poetry as an art, and the function of such an art is to teach and delight. As it preaches a moral or it sends out a message, a strong moral message, it should not fail to entertain the reader as well. Very strong in who were the poets who lived before him, including Chaucer and others, and most of the writers from Italy. He talks about them. Before he concludes, it has a function, a definite function. Right. Then, by the time Dryden started writing, drama was the most impressive form of art. So, at that time, there were many raging debates. Now, what were those debates? Who were superior, the ancients or the moderns, the Elizabethans, or the writers who were writing during the Restoration era? Who were superior, the English or the French? So, the whole work was a debate on who was superior through a few imaginary, uh, of course, they were real life characters. Through an imaginary journey on river Thames, they discuss. So, actually, it is an open ended discussion. It doesn't say who is superior. Each one presents their point, and ultimately, the readers have to uh, draw for themselves the merits of the Elizabethans, the merits of the Restoration era dramatists, the merits of the French writers, the merits of each of these. A very different way of presenting spiritual lectures. Again, we'll move forward. Something interesting happened during the time of a romantic age. Wordsworth and Coleridge, they started talking about their own views on poetry because they were practitioners. Here is a writer doubling as a critic, not of his own work, but talking about his critical position. Now, from more critical standpoint, they write poetry. So, for example, when Wordsworth says, it's a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings and emotions recollected in tranquility. Well, we know this because I'm using some of the familiar statements which he practiced. Remember a poem like Daffodils, where he says, my heart, now I'll move on to another poem.